Hey everybody, and welcome to Dear Mr. Potter. I'm Alistair Stevens. Thank you all so much for joining me this afternoon. Here in the chat already, we have Becca and Angela and Karen and Jenna and Prism Cat joining us for the first time, and Lily and Heroes and Bards. It is wonderful to have you all here for, well, what is a fairly quiet reading this week. There's not that much going to happen as we discuss chapters 4, 5, and 6 of the Goblet of Fire, as we return to the Burrow and hang out with some Weasleys and get some interesting exposition. This week's reading, I think it's fair to say, serves three valuable purposes. It allows us to catch up with our ever-expanding cast of characters, and we have a lot of characters to deal with. We have the 9 Weasleys, of course. We have Hermione, our reintroduction to Hermione in the frame of this book. We have Amos and Cedric Diggory, in addition to the Dursleys and Harry, whom we met previously. And we get all of the events which transpired since the end of Prisoner of Azkaban. We get a chance to catch up with the new status quo for these characters. So that's our first purpose. Our second purpose is that it allows us to layer in some important exposition which will be relevant later. And I know that some people struggle a little with the exposition that we get in this particular reading. We get traveling by means of apparition and disapparition. We get portkeys, of course, which are going to be absolutely vital later. And we call out Bertha Jorkin's mysterious disappearance and a few other subplot elements which will show up later in the story. Thirdly, and most importantly, I would argue, these chapters continue the evolution of our understanding of the wizarding world and the reframing of that understanding within the context of Goblet of Fire. Previously, the Muggle world has been constrictive and limiting, and the wizarding world, by contrast, has been wide open, has been replete with possibility, has represented, for Harry in particular, and for readers in general, I think, freedom. But that is now being challenged. We're now seeing, partly because J.K. Rowling is reframing the wizarding world as we move forward through the series, and partly because of Harry's encroaching adolescence and his shifting perspective on the world around him, now we are beginning to see the limitations contained within the wizarding world too. We get these additional cumulative perspectives on the workings of the wizard world, on wizard bureaucracy in particular. We get the elaborate preparations for the World Cup, for example. We get the notion of the apparating license. We get Percy's concern over international standardizations of the thickness of cauldrons and so on and so forth. And all of that serves, particularly within the context of our contrast with the life of the Weasleys, all of that serves to present a wizarding world to us that is more complete, more bureaucratic, more legalistic, more mundane than the perspectives that we've had previously. Of course, we've had some mention of this. We've had some thoughts and some perspectives on this, going all the way back, I would argue, to the end of Chamber of Secrets, but really within Prisoner of Azkaban. We talked a lot in our discussion of Prisoner of Azkaban about the legalistic structures of the wizarding world, about crime and punishment specifically, but also about the inevitable corruption that associates itself with bureaucracy, with management, with society in that capital S sense. We're going to see more and more of that as we move through. And particularly in next week's reading, we're going to get the opportunity to see the Wizarding World Cup, and that is only going to prime us for the contrast when it comes with the Tri-Wizard Tournament later in the story. There's a lot of really interesting and really crunchy thematic stuff happening, even in these chapters, which are generally quite peaceful, generally quite engaging and warm and cozy in that uniquely Weasleyan way. You know, we get to spend some time in the Burrow, which is always rewarding, is always comforting, is always calm. And well, calm is perhaps not quite the right word, but for readers, I think calm, and always evocative of an interesting perspective on social dynamics within the world of Harry Potter and within British fiction, and I would dare say within British culture in general. I think that the Weasleys here are represented compellingly, but almost incidentally, as a contrast with the Dursleys. The Dursleys are a suburban family, and this is less to do with the discontinuity between Muggle experience and wizard experience, I would argue, than it is to do with different kind of British social order hierarchy conflicts there. I think that the Dursleys are a suburban family. They are concerned, preoccupied, driven, compelled by normality. They want to be mundane. The Weasleys have no time for that. And again, this is less to do with the fact that they are a wizarding family and more to do with the fact that they are a rural family. They are embracing older traditions of community and inclusion, good-hearted and positive traditions of community and inclusion. Let me see. I wanted to begin with an unusual step here and actually begin with a question. I'm going to cancel the slide first of all. Hello, everyone. I hope that you're all having a very pleasant Tuesday. I wanted to begin with a question that was asked by Melissa right here at the beginning, because it would be very easy to spend the next 90 minutes just talking about the Weasleys, talking about Molly, of course, but also talking about Arthur, who is magnificent. Melissa asked here in the Crowdcast chat interface, which of these would you rate as the best Arthur Weasley moment so far in Goblet of Fire? A, blasting open the fireplace, covering the Dursleys' living room. B, chastising Fred and George, but not initially planning to tell Molly about Dudley's engorged tongue. C, holding Harry's shoulder in complete disbelief that Vernon would not acknowledge Harry before leaving for the summer. Or D, collecting plugs and telling the Dursleys about it. Take a moment here in the Crowdcast chat. The live audience can take a moment to answer that question themselves. You can all chip in there, A, B, C, or D, which is the most wonderful Arthur Weasley moment in the chapters so far. I have a strong answer to this. I have an absolutely definite answer to this. I am incredibly charmed by the way that he parents Fred and George. I am incredibly charmed, of course, by the appearance in the fireplace. We're going to talk a little about that as we move through the slides that I've pulled. I love the beat about electricity and his understanding, his almost partial understanding of electricity, and the fact that he can identify an electrical item by the existence of the plug, and he collects the plugs as distinct from the items themselves. Also, he collects batteries. You know, the wife thinks I'm mad, but you know how we men are with our collections of things that are awesome and almost pseudo-magical, muggle magical in that particular way. I love all of those things. I love everything that we get from Arthur Weasley, but for me, the most touching moment is that moment when he comforts Harry, when he puts his hand on Harry's shoulder, because he cannot believe that Vernon Dursley is not going to say goodbye. He cannot believe this failure of fundamental human decency. And that is what sets Arthur and Molly Weasley apart. It is not that they are magical. It is not that they are the mother and father of this sprawling and anarchic wizarding family. It is that at their heart, they are decent people. So for me, it's that extraordinarily touching moment where Arthur continues his disbelief, right? He rejects the idea outright, first of all, that Vernon Dursley will not say goodbye to Harry. He comforts Harry and seeks to kind of bridge that gap. He seeks to extend his own decency to encompass Vernon Dursley and says, maybe you don't understand what's happening. You're not going to see him now for a year. He's going to stay with us until school starts again, and then he's going to be gone for a year. You're not going to see him until next summer. Obviously, you don't understand that, because if you did understand that, you would obviously say goodbye, because that's just what people do. And of course, he shames Vernon Dursley into taking decent action for what is perhaps, well, the first time in a very long while, at least. I absolutely love that. Yeah. Let me see. As I scroll back through the chat, you guys are very chatty already. It Don't Connect says, one does not parent Fred and George. One attempts to keep them from blowing themselves up. Yes, that's about as much as you can do. Yes, it's absolutely fair. Good. All right. Let me see. Good. Everything seems to be working. Everything seems to be working here in the live stream, which is great. Good. Let's get into our reading then. Let's get into our slides that we're going to study today as I share with you that title slide first of all, and pick up with chapter 4, Back to the Burrow. By 12 o'clock the next day, Harry's school trunk was packed with his school things and all his most prized possessions. The invisibility cloak he had inherited from his father, the broomstick he had gotten from Sirius, the enchanted map of Hogwarts he had been given by Fred and George Weasley last year. He had emptied his hiding place under the loose floorboard of all food, double-checked every nook and cranny of his bedroom for forgotten spellbooks or quills, and taken down the chart on the wall, counting down the days to September the 1st, on which he liked to cross off the days remaining until his return to Hogwarts. The atmosphere inside number 4 Privet Drive was extremely tense. The imminent arrival at their house of an assortment of wizards was making the Dursleys uptight and irritable. Uncle Vernon had looked downright alarmed when Harry informed him that the Weasleys would be arriving at 5 o'clock the very next day. I hope you told them to dress properly, these people, he snarled at once. I've seen the sort of stuff you lot wear. They'd better have the decency to put on normal clothes, that's all. One of the most interesting shifts that we've observed so far in the Harry Potter series is this reframing of Muggle experience. As I've discussed before, in the first 2 books, the Muggle world is dominant and the wizarding world is hidden away, is sequestered away from the threat of the mundane realm. We begin to see that change in Prisoner of Azkaban, as we noted at the beginning of that book, where suddenly Muggles are more vulnerable. The wizarding world, as it expands, is pushing back against the boundaries of the Muggle world and making it smaller and smaller and smaller. And now we see the ultimate example of that, I think. I mean, not actually the ultimate example of that within the frame of the Harry Potter series, because we're going to see the wizarding world forcibly intrude into the Muggle world in subsequent books in the series. But up to this point, this is the ultimate example of this reframing, of this shift in balance between Muggle and wizard life. The Dursleys are effectively besieged at this point, not just in this slide, this is from the very opening of the chapter, of course, but throughout the chapter, up until the appearance of Arthur Weasley, the destructive and sudden appearance of Arthur Weasley and the other Weasley boys. Up until that point, the Dursleys are besieged. They are almost victims of this possible intrusion into their life. Now, we ought not perhaps to extend too much kindness and too much empathy toward the Dursleys. The reason that they are feeling so besieged is, of course, that they themselves have chosen to turn their backs on Harry's lineage and the lineage of their family, the shared lineage of their family, the shared tradition within their family of wizarding life. They've turned their back on that and sought instead this kind of austere normalcy, this austere mundanity. But there is, I think, a certain empathy that is elicited within the reader as we look forward to the imminent arrival of an unknowable force. I hope you told them to dress properly, these people, he snarled at once. I've seen the sort of stuff you lot wear. They'd better have the decency to put on normal clothes, that's all. Here, Vernon Dursley is just clutching at anything to which he might possibly be able to object. He's trying to exert control over a life that has now been taken from him, an experience that has been taken from him, an experience that may, in the end, for all he knows, at least, permanently destroy his place here on Privet Drive. Now, perhaps that place on Privet Drive is not worth the protection that he is pouring into it, the fear of disruption that Vernon Dursley clearly has. But it is still an intrusion into the life that he has chosen. That is, yes, as Joni's Virtual says here in the Crowdcast chat, I would feel a little threatened if someone blew up my fireplace. I mean, fair, right? That's the ultimate example of this. This is the violent and physical intrusion of the wizarding world into the Dursleys' home. And we must remember that when they have run into the wizarding world before, it has either been an excessive magical act within the mundane realm, or they themselves have left the mundane realm. We talked about this all the way back at the very beginning of Dear Mr. Potter with their flight out to the shack on the rock in the ocean, where Hagrid first shows up and tells Harry, as you will all remember, I'm sure, that he is, in fact, a wizard. The Dursleys there have left behind Privet Drive and everything that Privet Drive represents. And now, from the perspective of Goblet of Fire, we understand, oh, yes, actually, your existence, your life, the life that you have chosen is a vulnerable and fragile thing. It is a vulnerable and fragile thing that is being protected not just by you, but in fact by an entire legalistic mechanism within the wizarding world. The Ministry of Magic is seeking to outright protect Muggle existence and Muggle ignorance, I suppose. But it is still vulnerable nonetheless. And this is the forcible intrusion here. Nikki says, the Muggle Dursleys are besieged. Excuse me, the Crowdcast chat is scrolling out of my control right now. Nikki says, the Muggle Dursleys are besieged by magic in the opening, and later on the Muggles at the World Cup are besieged by magic as well. At the end of the book, Muggles everywhere will no longer be safe from the violent intrusion from magic again, at least for a while. Absolutely right, Nikki, right? This isn't just a textural world-building choice by J.K. Rowling. All of this is serving double duty. It is changing our understanding of the world in the here and now. Absolutely. It is giving us a new and fresh perspective on the life of the Dursleys. Absolutely. But it is also exposition that will be invaluable later. We will be able to contrast and compare this section of the book, this week's reading, with next week's reading. When we actually get to the Quidditch World Cup and the emergence of the Dark Mark, we're going to be able to see exactly how these forces are in suppressed and imminently open conflict. The world is about to get very, very dangerous indeed. And while Vernon and Petunia and Dudley Dursley are feeling unjustifiably vulnerable right now, there is still, I think, a token of truth within the heart of this conflict. It's really very good. It's really great world building and really great development here. Yes, good. Good. All right, let's move on to our second slide and the actual arrival of the Weasleys at number 4, Privet Drive. Loud bangings and scrapings were coming from behind the Dursleys' boarded-up fireplace, which had a fake coal fire plugged in front of it. What is it? Gasped Aunt Petunia, who had backed against the wall and was staring terrified toward the fire. What is it, Vernon? But they were left in doubt barely a second longer. Voices could be heard from inside the blocked fireplace. Ouch! Fred, no, go back! Go back! There's been some kind of mistake. Tell George not to... Ouch! George, no, there's no room. Go back quickly and tell Ron. Maybe Harry can hear us, Dad. Maybe he'll be able to get us out. There was a loud hammering of fists on the boards behind the electric fire. Harry! Harry, can you hear us? The Dursleys rounded on Harry like a pair of angry wolverines. "What is this?" growled Uncle Vernon. "What's going on?" They tried to get here by flue powder," said Harry, fighting a mad desire to laugh. "They can travel by fire, only you've blocked the fireplace. Hang on." He approached the fireplace and called through the boards. "Mr. Weasley, can you hear me?" There is a veiled and vague kind of satire here associated with the Dursleys, that they have, of course, boarded up their fireplace here at number 4 Privet Drive and replaced it with an electric fire in front, a fake coal fire specifically. This facsimile of the real thing, this mundane representation of something much older and something much more metaphorically important, something much more symbolically important. They have replaced the hearth with the appearance of a fireplace. They have taken the substance of the thing and replaced it with the facade of that thing, a flimsy and temporary facade at that. And this is, I think, absolutely representative of part of that satirical differentiation that I was discussing earlier between the Weasleys' rural existence and the Dursleys' suburban existence. I think that we can absolutely read a certain class differential here, because, of course, for those of you who are not British and for those of you who may not carry some of these same assumptions, if you haven't grown up in this culture and absorbed all of these, presumptions and prejudices about the kinds of people who live in particular places, suburbia is civilized. Suburbia is normal. Suburbia is cultured and concerned very much with appearances, whereas the rural community in which the Weasleys find themselves is poor, is to be looked down upon, is unpolished, is uncivil. That's very much the distinction at the heart of British culture, particularly, in that kind of that latter half of the 20th century kind of way. I think that this is absolutely mocking outright the Dursleys' preoccupation with facades and with appearances, while representing, of course, the true heart of the Weasleys. It is established by this point that we can travel by flue powder within the Harry Potter universe. This was established back in the previous book, but we get a new perspective on that now. What happens when that metaphor, that magical symbol of being able to travel through fire, this very potent and ancient magical symbol, what happens when that crashes into the mundanity of suburban life? Well, this literally is what happens when that crashes into the mundanity of suburban life. Yes. Good. Of fireplaces, we're talking about who has fireplaces. Yes, I know fireplaces still too infrequent in homes. I still believe, yes, as Dry Heaving Llama says, I hate you can't buy a house with a real fireplace anymore. That does seem to be a regional thing. That does seem to be a regional variation. But yes, it's a wonderful thing to have a fireplace right there at the heart of your home. Yes, Alice says also the Clean Air Act might not be boarded up by choice. Probably is, though. Yes, I mean, the Clean Air Act, in particular, in and around London, in and around the built-up urban areas of the southeast of England, in particular, was a very important thing. And even, when I was living in the northeast of Scotland, we had to be mindful of the Clean Air Act and burn the clean coal and the clean wood and try to be mindful of our neighbours and be responsible citizens in that regard. So clearly, there are real-world analogs, real-world issues that are pushing back against the primacy of the fireplace at the heart of the home. But even then, I would argue that is representative of, modernity and the kind of soulless march of civilization that has rendered suburbia so resolutely unmagical. Yeah. Raven Darkcomb says, my boyfriend's family has a fireplace in the bathroom and I'm very disappointed that it isn't used. Why wouldn't you want a bath with a fire? That sounds very good. I like that a lot. And Lily says, we're living in the Pacific Northwest. We all have wood stoves, not fireplaces, but wood fires are central to a lot of people's heating systems. Yes, the lighting of fire, the kindling of fire is still a primal and human act. And here we see it rejected and replaced with the trinket, with the facade here. We also get, of course, this brilliant Weasleyan riot of language as we're trying to deal with the problem, as we're trying to work the problem here. They were left in doubt barely a second longer. Voices could be heard from inside the blocked fireplace. Ouch! Fred! No! Go back! Go back! There's been some kind of mistake. Tell George not to. Ouch! George! No! There's no room. Go back quickly and tell Ron. Arthur Weasley trying to stem the tide of Weasleys here behind the fireplace. Yes. Let's keep going to the escape from the fireplace. We're moving very quickly through this fourth chapter in the book because there's a lot of repetition of these same core ideas, a lot of character beats, but we'll really get to the meat of this in the next chapter. Yeah. Bang! The electric fire shot across the room as the boarded-up fireplace burst outward, expelling Mr. Weasley, Fred, George, and Ron in a cloud of rubble and loose chippings. Aunt Petunia shrieked and fell backwards over the coffee table. Uncle Vernon caught her before she hit the floor and gaped, speechless at the Weasleys, all of whom had bright red hair, including Fred and George, who were identical to the last freckle. "That's better," panted Mr. Weasley, brushing dust from his long green robes and straightening his glasses. "Ah, you must be Harry's aunt and uncle." Tall, thin, and balding, he moved toward Uncle Vernon, his hand, outstretched. But Uncle Vernon backed away several paces, dragging Aunt Petunia. Words utterly failed Uncle Vernon. His best suit was covered in white dust, which had settled in his hair and mustache and made him look as though he had just aged 30 years. "Oh, yes. Sorry about that," said Mr. Weasley, lowering his hand and looking over his shoulder at the blasted fireplace. "It's all my fault. It just didn't occur to me that we wouldn't be able to get out the other end. I had your fireplace connected to the Flu network, you see, just for the afternoon, so we could get Harry. Muggle fireplaces aren't supposed to be connected, strictly speaking, but I've got a useful contact at the Flu regulation panel, and he fixed it for me. I can put it right in a jiffy, though. Don't worry. I'll light the fire to send the boys back, and then I can repair your fireplace before I disapparate." Harry was ready to bet the Dursleys hadn't understood a single word of this. They were still gaping at Mr. Weasley, thunderstruck. Aunt Petunia staggered upright again and hid behind Uncle Vernon. So we're playing the Dursleys for laughs here, not for the first or the last time. We're playing their discomfort and their alarm and their panic and their lack of understanding, their ignorance of this world for laughs. We're drawing here a greater distinction between the Dursleys and Harry, and therefore between the Wizarding world and the Muggle world. But again, I think that we, particularly as adult readers, might just feel a sting of empathy here for the Dursleys, that they, for all that they are awful and for all that they have ruled Harry's life with an undue severity, they did not ask for this intrusion, and this intrusion has been destructive, inadvertently destructive perhaps, but destructive nonetheless. And for all that the Dursleys are ignorant, as called out by that last paragraph, Harry was ready to bet that the Dursleys hadn't understood a single word of this. Let's remember that Arthur Weasley has also demonstrated a real ignorance here, a dangerous ignorance here. It is surprising, even, that no one has been harmed by the destruction of this fireplace, by the gaping hole that has been left in the wall of the Dursleys' home. It's one thing for Aunt Petunia to stumble backward over the coffee table and fall, but it is arguably pretty lucky that Uncle Vernon caught her and didn't, let her fall and suffer some grievous injury because of the alarm caused by the arrival of the Weasleys. Ignorance here is the problem. And it's occurring to me as I read these early chapters that ignorance is going to be one of the major themes of this book. And I didn't call out ignorance and knowledge last week when I was describing the themes that we were going to study as we moved through Goblet of Fire, because it is only now emerging to me as one of the primary themes of Goblet of Fire. But the idea that we can be ignorant thanks to the fault of circumstance, kind of unduly ignorant, that is tragic. That is something about which we ought to be concerned. That is something about which we ought to, seek to rectify in pretty much every circumstance. And it's no coincidence, of course, that Harry Potter primarily as a series is concerned with the operation of a school and the learning of things, the passing of knowledge from one generation to the next. Magical knowledge almost exclusively within the bounds of Hogwarts, but still the passing of knowledge. We are fighting that kind of undue and unwillful, that inadvertent ignorance that afflicts, arguably all children. That's maybe language a little more severe than I would have intended had I scripted that thought out, but nonetheless, here we are. We're fighting back ignorance with the light of enlightenment, with the light of illumination. Tautological phrases all over the place here. But there is another kind of ignorance, and it is a kind of ignorance that is differentiated here between Arthur Weasley and Vernon Dursley. Arthur does not understand the Muggle world, though Arthur strives to understand the Muggle world. His ignorance is inadvertent. Vernon Dursley's ignorance is deliberate. Vernon Dursley's ignorance is an ignorance born of insecurity. He has turned his back on the wizarding world. There is no reason why he wouldn't know about the flu powder and the flu regulation panel and the traveling methods of wizards. He has the opportunity to learn this. One might even argue he has the obligation to learn this. And of course, that notion of willful ignorance, that notion of willful blindness will be terribly, terribly significant later in the book. So this is, I think, an important introduction to that thematic conflict, and very subtly here, an important introduction to what differentiates and to what redeems one half of that conflict, the difference between inadvertent ignorance, which we seek to overcome, and deliberate ignorance, which we seek to preserve. Alexa says, Arthur is a prime example of an ignorant / fish out of water that doesn't drive me crazy. I really hate ignorant characters, in part because it stresses me out that they aren't attempting to understand. Yes, it's part of the reason, Alexis continues, I hate Elf. The character of Buddy isn't trying to fit in, and it makes me mad. Arthur isn't trying, Alexis has said here, but I think means Arthur is trying, in fact. Yes, me too, right? That kind of willful ignorance is, well, far more destructive than inadvertently showing up in someone's boarded up fireplace and then blowing the wall out here in the Dursleys' living room. Far more socially and culturally destructive than that. Willful ignorance is a force of darkness and allows shadows to deepen where there ought not to be shadows at all. And I think that we can be a little skeptical within the fantasy tradition of the absolute virtue of enlightenment. And I'm thinking back, I suppose, to the discussions that we had about the Patronus charm back in Prisoner of Azkaban. And the idea that the Patronus charm is enormously powerful, it is enormously advanced, it is enormously sophisticated, and is not taught to the students at Hogwarts as a rule. And yet, Professor Lupin teaches it to Harry, who will later teach it to others, and it will be absolutely vital in the pursuit of noble and worthy goals within the frame of the entire Harry Potter series. Has already been, I think you can argue at the end of Prisoner of Azkaban, has already been put to worthy and noble purpose, but we're only starting with the Patronus charm. We have not yet begun to delve into the world of Patronuses in general. So we might be skeptical of the unqualified importance of enlightenment, the unqualified importance of education, power, knowledge. These can be dangerous things, particularly within the wizarding world, more so even than within either the Muggle realm in the frame of J.K. Rowling's work or in the naturalistic frame of the world around us. I think that we must strive at least to be skeptical. We must strive at least to leaven knowledge, to leaven enlightenment with wisdom, with the skill and the perspective necessary to use that knowledge for good ends. But I'm interested in this theme as it is emerging in the text as we move through this series, and I'll be keeping track of this as we go forward, yes. Oh, interesting. Clambert just said, I just realized something. Arthur had the Dursley house connected to the Flu Network on a whim, but he could do that because he had connections at the Ministry. That means in Book 7, Death Eaters could just show up at any house they wanted to, Muggle or Wizard, as long as they had a fireplace. Well, you know, we'll try and catch up. There are some inconsistencies with the Death Eaters. You know, we're going to be introduced to portkeys in today's reading, and the portkeys leave us with an open question regarding the behaviors of the Death Eaters in Book 7 too, particularly with regard to Hogwarts itself. So we'll try to integrate what we learn later. We'll try to integrate the steps taken by the Death Eaters much later in the series with our understanding of the world as a whole. But we, again, must be mindful of the fact that J.K. Rowling is revising as she's moving forward. You know, changes are being made, and that as you know, we talked at the end of Prisoner of Azkaban about the Marauder's Map, which Harry noted in the beginning of today's reading is one of his most prized and valuable possessions. The Marauder's Map is incredibly dangerous, narratively speaking, because it gives you an easy out to pretty much any situation which might involve the movement of good or evil characters around the campus of Hogwarts itself. So J.K. Rowling is going to continue to kind of be in a reflexive discourse with her own secondary creation. She is going to continue to filter these things that she has created and both push back against them and allow them to push back against her. That's going to be an ongoing process of kind of intertextual adaptation as we move forward through the rest of the series, as it has already been a process of intertextual adaptation, bringing us from book 1 to book 4 here in the series. Okay, let me catch up with the chat. Everything seems to be, yeah, exactly. Dry Heaving Llama says the Marauder's Map is basically like an in-game mini-map or radar system. It would be so OP in an FPS. Yeah, no, absolutely, right? It's like the mini-map that you get in the Batman Arkham Asylum games or in like the Assassin's Creed series, where it just shows every single thing of significance around you and gives you a wildly unfair advantage. Or if you've seen the new Square Hitman game, the Square Enix Hitman game, the episodic game that was released last year, Last year before, I suppose, 2016, that game came out. Good Lord. How time flies. Okay, that is it for chapter 4. We're not yet back at the Burrow. We disappear in the swirl of green flame right there at the end of chapter 4 and move into chapter 5, Weasley's Wizard Wheezes. "How are you doing, Harry?" said the nearer of the two, grinning at him and holding out a large hand, which Harry shook, feeling calluses and blisters under his fingers. This had to be Charlie, who worked with dragons in Romania. Charlie was built like the twins, shorter and stockier than Percy and Ron, who were both long and lanky. He had a broad, good-natured face, which was weather-beaten, and so freckly that he looked almost tanned. His arms were muscular, and one of them had a large, shiny burn on it. Bill got to his feet, smiling, and also shook Harry's hand. Bill came as something of a surprise. Harry knew that he worked for the wizarding bank Gringotts, and that Bill had been head boy at Hogwarts. Harry had always imagined Bill to be an older version of Percy, fussy about rule-breaking and fond of bossing everyone around. However, Bill was, there was no other word for it, cool. He was tall, with long hair that he tied back in a ponytail. He was wearing an earring with what looked like a fang dangling from it. Bill's clothes would not have looked out of place at a rock concert, except that Harry recognized his boots to be made not of leather, but of dragon hide. Before any of them could say anything else, there was a faint popping noise, and Mr. Weasley appeared out of thin air at George's shoulder. He was looking angrier than Harry had ever seen him. "That wasn't funny, Fred!" he shouted. "What on earth did you give that Muggle boy?" "I didn't give him anything," said Fred with another evil grin. "I just dropped it. It was his fault he went and ate it. I never told him to." The introduction to Charlie and Bill Weasley, two more members of the Weasley clan, the other two members of the Weasley clan, I suppose, bringing our total of Weasleys to 9, a whole bushelful of Weasleys. And here we get 2 more perspectives on Weasleyness, I suppose, on what it is that unites this family beyond the red hair and the freckles, of course, what it is that makes these characters, this family of characters, this set of characters distinct. What is it that we get from Charlie here? Well, we get a certain physicality, a certain heavy musculature here. Charlie was built like the twins, shorter and stockier than Percy and Ron, who were both long and lanky, but, and this is crucial, he had a broad, good-natured face, which was weather-beaten and so freckly he looked almost tanned. His arms were muscular, and one of them had a large, shiny burn on it. He is not, you'll note, nursing that burn. That burn, since it is large and shiny, is not in any way bandaged. Our introduction to Charlie is an introduction to a character who is kind of connected to his own physicality and to the world around him. There is nothing effete or suspicious about Charlie at this point. There is nothing that pushes back against the rough and tumble nature of the Weasleys, nothing that pushes back against that notion of the Weasleys as a rural family, of a family that springs forth from the earth, or is at least more connected to the earth. And we should note too, of course, while we're talking about the contrast between the wizarding world and the Muggle world, while we're talking about the contrast specifically between the Dursleys and the Weasleys, that it is interesting that the Weasleys, being more rural, are more closely connected to the earth. We're going to get a very important beat in just a couple of slides time, maybe even on, a couple of slides time. We're going to get a very important beat that Molly is going to usher everyone out so that they can eat in the garden because there isn't enough space in the house for everyone. And that notion of eating out in the garden, the way in which that connects us back to the earth is enormously important. Yes, it is speaking to older traditions. It is speaking to an older kind of family unit, a more anarchic, less civil kind of family unit, but a family unit that is bonded by things greater than the obligations of civility, I suppose, greater than the facade of civility. The Weasleys are closer to the earth, whereas the Dursleys are removed from the earth. This brings us back to the discussion of the fireplace and the electric fire, which has been installed to replace it, if you like. The obvious plug that Arthur Weasley calls out there. Suburbia is divorced from the natural world. The Dursleys are divorced from the natural world, and this is another perspective, I think. This is another way in which the wizarding world has expanded, and in that expansion has pushed back against the Muggle world and made it smaller. The Muggle world is now not just less elevated than the wizarding world, right? When we go to Hogwarts initially, we get on the train and we journey north and north and north, and we're traveling, up in a sense. We are ascending out of the normal world up toward the magical world, and the magical world is higher and is more airy and occupies this space above the normal world beneath it. It occupies a space above the Muggle realm. But now the Weasleys, and this has been true, of course, throughout our consistent introduction to the Weasleys and our consistent introduction to the Burrow, but now is more true than ever. The Weasleys, because they are connected to the Earth, now exist beneath the Muggle world, too. The Muggle world is bounded on all sides by the Wizarding world and is thus all the more fragile. It is a created thing. It is not true. It has no self-continuity to it. It is bounded on all sides by wizardry and by magic and is preserved by that whim. Excuse me for inadvertently scrolling forward a couple of slides there. That is not a thing that I wanted to do, but I'm still pulling all of this out. Gosh, that's an interesting question. Clambert says, weird question. Where can I find that dragons as a metaphor for asexuality? That's, gosh, a fascinating question. I have no idea if there are any resources that anyone knows. I have not honestly given any thought to that interpretation. I will, and we'll probably circle back around to it before the end of this book. But that's a very interesting thought. We are going to get an opportunity. We are going to get numerous opportunities, in fact, to talk about the ways in which non-human characters are used in the way that all fantasy stories use non-human characters to reflect elements and particular selections of our humanity. We're going to be looking at house elves, of course. We're going to be looking at Vila. We're going to be looking, there's a lot to discuss in that particular regard as we move through the rest of this book. So I'm very excited to talk about that and to talk about some of the different ways in which the non-human species associated with Harry Potter's existence in the Wizarding world reflect our own humanity. That is one of the things that fantasy stories can do by pulling in those traditional fantasy elements, those speculative elements, I suppose. Good. Dry Heaving Llama says everyone knows that dragons are asexual. They're randomly spawned encounters in Skyrim, after all. Yeah, there's not much of an ecosystem in Skyrim vis-a-vis the dragons. Yes, I've been thinking a lot about playing Skyrim lately, you guys. I might need to circle back around to that game now that it's got the enhanced edition upgrades and the graphics engine is all the better than it used to be. Though, one of these days I'll buy a Switch and then just sink into it. Yes, good. Good. Skyrim is still my favorite game, says Clambert. Yeah, we'll talk about it. If you haven't checked out Johnny's YouTube channel, maybe Johnny can drop a link in the chat here. Yes, Johnny's saying do it. Favorite game. Yes. Dry Heaving Llamas is confirming the game is still buggy as all get out. That's kind of what I like about those Bethesda games, though. I kind of like that punky, raucous, ill-fitting kind of sensibility that you get from the Elder Scrolls games and the Fallout games too. So I find it charming more often than not, though. Yes, I've run into my share of game-breaking bugs too in all of those games. Good. Okay, so we'll talk a lot about the expanded world as we move forward through this. So we've talked a little about Charlie. We've talked a little about Charlie's physicality, and now Bill. Bill got to his feet smiling and also shook Harry's hand. Smiling, first, not unimportant, right? The Weasleys are friendly, are affable, are welcoming. They are inclusive. This is important, although we're now so used to that we would probably have expected it even if it wasn't noted directly. If it just read Bill got to his feet and also shook Harry's hand, we would probably imagine him smiling, I think, at this point, unless the narration specifically called out the contrary. Bill came as something of a surprise. Harry knew that he worked for the Wizarding Bank at Gringotts and that Bill had been head boy at Hogwarts. Okay. He is engaged he works for the premier wizard financial institution. We're skeptical of that already. After dealing with the Ministry back in Prisoner of Azkaban, after looking at these legalistic structures, we have a sense that perhaps the pillars of wizard society are maybe not all that we want them to be. And Gringotts, of course, run by gnomes, is a little more run by goblins. Excuse me, is a little more suspicious. Again, we're pulling elements of, and we've talked about the representation of goblins within the frame of Harry Potter and the possible, anti-Semitic interpretations that can be applied to those goblins. More on that when we have the opportunity to talk about them directly again, as we will. So we're looking at these two structures with which Harry is very familiar. The financial institution that underpins the wizarding world, and of course, head boy at Hogwarts. We've seen head boys at Hogwarts before. We've made fun of Percy consistently for being exactly that kind of scrupulous and pedantic head boy that Harry's expecting from Bill. But Bill is different. Bill is cool. And look at how Harry interprets this. However Bill was, there was no other word for it, cool. In what ways, Harry, was Bill cool? Well, he was tall. Good. Okay. So not nerdy. That's fine. I mean, Percy is also tall, as we've just noted, but okay, he was tall with long hair that he tied back in a ponytail. Well, this is clearly rebellious. He was wearing an earring with what looked like a fang dangling from it. Bill's clothes would not have looked out of place at a rock concert, except that Harry recognized his boots to be made not of leather, but of dragon hide. Wow, he is cool. He is not what you would expect. He is not conforming to normality. He is deliberately provocative in his attire, in his presentation to the world. He is deliberately provocative. From his long hair to his dragonhide boots, he is not seeking to fit in. And of course, coolness is about that. Coolness, particularly when you are Harry's age, is about that willful expression of identity without seeking to conform to the expectations of others. So Bill represents a subversion of our expectation in a very similar way to Charlie. Charlie is more physical and more rugged than we might expect, as Bill is cooler than we might expect. The Weasleys are capable of being more, which is fascinating, I think. Yeah. Okay. Jenna's actually giving us a really good gloss of this, which I like a lot. Jenna says the problem with goblins is that their original conceit is incredibly anti-Semitic, and JKR didn't really interrogate that when applying them to her series. It's the lack of thought that frustrates me more than anything else. The tropes she pulls on for Snape's appearance are also anti-Semitic. I don't think JKR is anti-Semitic, but she didn't consider it at all, seemingly, while writing. I think that is absolutely fair. I would argue that the origin of the goblin archetype is not inherently anti-Semitic, but I would absolutely concede the point that it has been turned to dark purpose in the centuries since that archetype arose in folklore and in fairy tale fiction. So I don't think that there is an innate connection there. I don't think that there is an integral connection there, but that doesn't excuse the co-opting of that imagery, the co-opting of that metaphor for grim and anti-Semitic purposes. Yes, absolutely. And I do think that you're right. It's always a difficult challenge, I think, for authors who are writing within an established framework, who are writing with specific and rich reference to the conventions which have been established within their genre. J.K. Rowling pulls goblins for Gringotts because that makes a lot of sense given the fantasy tradition of goblins, right? Just in a narrative completely divorced from the real world, completely divorced from the purposes to which these images have been put, it's a strong choice. It is true and resonant with our understanding of fairy tales and folklore stories, with our understanding of, late 19th century and early 20th century fantasy stories, even, mid 20th century fantasy stories, before that kind of somewhat simple and folkloric, that kind of archetypal and mythic depiction of these races, these fantasy races, became somewhat unfashionable, I suppose. JKR is plugging directly into that fantasy tradition. But I think, Jenna, you're absolutely right. Failing to meaningfully interrogate those ideas as she presents them on the page, failing to present sufficient thought and nuance and arguably empathy, I think, in that regard. She is not alone in that. Many writers have faltered at that hurdle, including, of course, my favorite fantasy author, J.R.R. Tolkien, who is, I was going to say rightly criticized, I think legitimately criticized for his treatment of orcs and goblins, the same race within the bounds of J.R.R. Tolkien's fictional creation. He is criticized in a legitimate manner because of his treatment of orcs and goblins, and the idea that an entire race of beings is just outright evil, that we don't have to worry at all about killing them or brutalizing them or intimidating them or frightening them or subjugating them. We don't have to worry about any of that because they're just evil. You understand? I mean, they're just bad. Also a problematic concept, also a problematic thought. Yeah. Okay, let's keep moving onward here and see what we can do as we move forward. Yeah, yes. Good. Jenna says, I know that's not all goblins are, but a cursory reading gives that, and it's frustrating. No, absolutely. Like, I didn't want to in any way kind of undercut your point there. I completely agree with and validate your point. Yeah. Clambert's asking if anyone has watched Bright, not a super movie, but a really cool world. This is the Netflix original movie in which orcs, I guess, and fantasy creatures. And my understanding of Bright, I haven't seen it, but I've read a little bit about it, and my understanding is that the metaphor is just tissue paper thin, that it is just like just a sheen, just an oil slick sheen on the puddle of that world building enterprise. I'm interested in it. I do not expect it to have any great kind of significance or yield any deeper meanings. Yeah. Okay. Let's move onward to Percy, to the aforementioned Percy, in fact, and see how Percy's getting on here in the long summer holiday after his final year at Hogwarts. Just then, a door on the second landing opened, and a face poked out wearing horn-rimmed glasses and a very annoyed expression. "Hi, Percy," said Harry. "Oh, hello, Harry," said Percy. "I was wondering who was making all the noise. I'm trying to work in here, you know. I've got a report to finish for the office, and it's rather difficult to concentrate when people keep thundering up and down the stairs." We're not thundering, said Ron irritably. We're walking. Sir, if we've disturbed the top secret workings of the Ministry of Magic. What are you working on? Said Harry. A report for the Department of International Magical Cooperation, said Percy smugly. We're trying to standardize cauldron thickness. Some of these foreign imports are just a shade too thin. Leakages have been increasing at a rate of almost 3% a year. That'll change the world, that report will, said Ron. Front page of the Daily Prophet, I expect. Cauldron leaks. Percy went slightly pink. You might sneer, Ron, he said heatedly, but unless some sort of international law is imposed, we might find the market flooded with flimsy, shallow-bottomed products that seriously endanger... Yeah, all right, said Ron, and he started off upstairs again. Percy slammed his bedroom door shut. As Harry, Hermione, and Ginny followed Ron up 3 more flights of stairs, shouts from the kitchen below echoed up to them. It sounded as though Mr. Weasley had told Mrs. Weasley about the toffees. Raven asks, Percy, Brexit voter? 100%. This is outright satire. This is outright satire, which I think is only going to be kind of readily communicated to the reader if you are aware of the very specific relationship that Britain has with the rest of the European community. And I, of course, am speaking of this from a perspective that is now 20 years out of date from the writing of Goblet of Fire. Obviously, the relationship between Britain and the rest of the European community has changed markedly, and arguably not for the better. I would argue not for the better in the course of the last couple of years. This is a satirical reference to discussions which were had throughout Britain, throughout the entirety of Europe, of course, from really the middle of the 1970s onward. You know, the standardization of the curve of the banana, the standardization of you know, in some cases, very good and important things like, you know, automobile emissions and things of that sort. You know, there have been really great and progressive things accomplished by these kinds of negotiations exactly. But it is also a really easy satirical point to make. Oh, we're very preoccupied with this. And of course, J.K. Rowling isn't just poking fun at bureaucracy here, though she is. The idea of any kind of campaign to standardize cauldron thickness, it's the standardize there, I think, that hits the satirical point, right? It's not just ensure safety. It's not just to ensure consistency. It is to standardize. We must make this busy work for ourselves to ensure that everything is okay. And what is the threat to which Percy is responding here? We're trying to standardize cauldron thickness. Some of these foreign imports are just a shade too thin. Leakages have been increasing at a rate of almost 3% a year. Okay. Cauldron leakages at 3% a year, that is actually like significant. That is important. But some of these foreign imports are just a shade too thin, he says. That is the problem. And then comes back. You might sneer, Ron, but unless some sort of international law is imposed, we might find the market flooded with flimsy, shallow-bottomed products that seriously endanger the Brexit voting suspicion of foreigners and imported artifacts is absolutely a commonplace element in British political discourse. And J.K. Rowling is, as you might expect, mocking it outrageously here. It is unfortunate, I think, that Percy suffers for this. It is unfortunate that Percy becomes the butt of the joke again. Though even here, we're not just getting a joke. This isn't just a character beat that is supposed to be, you know, comic relief. All of this, is exposition in a sense. All of this is building into our understanding of this world as we move forward. Yeah. This is a great observation from Hannah. I like this a lot. Harry may find Percy comical, but he still wants him as a big brother. That's why it's so sad when Percy turns him in. Well, spoilers. Yes, but yes, it's yes. Harry's relationship with Percy is a really interesting one and distinct from his relationship with Ron and with Fred and George. I think Percy does represent something meaningful to Harry. We'll be able to look more closely at that as we move forward. Yeah, good. Let me see here. Excellent. Everything seems to be working. Let's keep going onward to, I had to limit myself. I could only pull one slide of Molly Weasley for this week's reading session. So here we go. The 4 of them left Ron's room and went back downstairs to find Mrs. Weasley alone in the kitchen, looking extremely bad-tempered. We're eating out in the garden, she said when they came in. There's just not room for 11 people in here. Can you take the plates outside, girls? Bill and Charlie are setting up the tables. Knives and forks, please, you two, she said to Ron and Harry, pointing her wand a little more vigorously than she'd intended to at a pile of potatoes in the sink, which shot out of their skins so fast that they ricocheted off the walls and ceiling. Oh, for heaven's sake, she snapped, now directing her wand at a dustpan, which hopped off the sideboard and started skating across the floor, scooping up the potatoes. Those two, she burst out savagely, now pulling pots and pans out of a cupboard, and Harry knew she meant Fred and George. I don't know what's going to happen to them. I really don't. No ambition unless you count making as much trouble as they possibly can. Mrs. Weasley slammed a large copper saucepan down on the kitchen table and began to wave her wand around inside it. A creamy sauce poured from the wand tip as she stirred. It's not as though they haven't got brains, she continued irritably, taking the saucepan over to the stove and lighting it with a further poke of her wand. But they're wasting them, and unless they pull themselves together soon, they'll be in real trouble. I've had more owls from Hogwarts about them than the rest put together. If they carry on the way they're going, they'll end up in front of the improper use of magic office. Molly Weasley, best wizard mom, happening right here on the page in front of us. And we see here too, the casual purpose to which magic is put, the ubiquitous purpose to which magic is put. We're framing Molly's occupation here. We're framing Molly's task here in very mundane terms. She has a house full of kids that she needs to feed, more kids even than she's accustomed to. So we're taking the tables outside, and Bill and Charlie are setting them up. We're going to take silverware out there. We're going to eat in the garden. It's going to be great. As I said, you know, this all connects back to this idea of this rural idyll, you know, this simple farmhouse life where we are connected to the earth and connected to the world and connected to each other. That's the Weasley way of life. That is why this is so utterly important. And as she's doing this, she's manipulating magic with a casual capability. Here she is, you know, popping the potatoes out of their skins and summoning the dustpan to clean up. But as she's doing it, every step is completely mundane. If she didn't have magic, everything that Molly Weasley is doing in this sequence would still be done. She would still accomplish all of these goals. Magic here is being used as a tool. It is being used as a means of effecting change in the world. It doesn't fundamentally change her relationship with her family or with her occupation or with the task in front of her. Oh, interesting. Raven asks, is there conservation of matter in this magic at all? No. Broadly speaking, no. As I've said before, the rules of magic laid out by J.K. Rowling, not completely consistent. And that's completely fine. She clearly has no interest in making the rules of magic consistent. Magic is allowed to be, throughout much of the frame of Harry Potter, with a few very specific exceptions, magic is allowed to be magic rather than science, rather than a more kind of formalized thing. That is in tension to a certain extent with the kinds of lessons which are imparted at Hogwarts, the kind of rigorous pseudo-scientific, I suppose we might kind of, rather than resting upon the word scientific, use an older term like natural philosophy, right? The lessons at Hogwarts seek to communicate magic in a way that is more in accord with the study of natural philosophy, the kind of gentleman scientist archetype, which seems to inform our understanding of science, and certainly the ongoing development seems to inform our understanding of magic, excuse me, and certainly the ongoing evolution of magic, as we're led to believe. But that never really connects. That never really settles properly. So magic is allowed to be magical, and yeah, it's you know, here we see just the mundanity of this. Molly is engaged in something that is completely commonplace, something that is completely normal, crucially, to everyone but Harry. Because what is Harry actually experiencing here? He is experiencing a mother providing for her family, pouring effort and love into the provision of food and sustenance for her family, while also, crucially, worrying about her family. And not worrying about how the actions of Fred and George will reflect on her and on Arthur and on the rest of the family, but whether or not they themselves will live up to their potential. Molly here is demonstrating a fundamental faith in her sons, in Fred and George specifically, that has never been shown to Harry. This is what the Weasleys are. This is what the Weasleys do. For all that this is spectacularly magical, for all that this reads like a cutscene from Fantasia or something similarly fantastical, this is a normal familial experience to everyone in the room except for Harry. Harry here is being reintroduced to a magic that is more powerful, a magic that is to Harry more important than magic. This is family. And this, much more than wands and spellbooks and sorcery, is what Harry has been missing for all of these years. This is why the Burrow still, to Harry and to the reader, feels more like home than Privet Dry ever did. Let me see. Good. Oh, we're summoning. Yes, Ryan is referencing the third law of transfiguration. Yeah, again, this is going to come back to haunt us by the time we get to the 7th book in the series, and the creation of food from nothing. I like. Let me see. I like Lily's explanation here. Maybe the sauce is more in the you can make it taste better sense, like Ged's bread that he tells Yarrow about. It will trick the mind but won't provide sustenance. Lily calling back to our discussion of a Wizard of Earthsea there. Yeah, it is possible that the sauce has no nutritional value, that as a summoned foodstuff, it will not actually sate the stomach, but will at least please the taste buds. This could be, you know, because it is a sauce, because it is an accompaniment. Perhaps Molly isn't quite breaking the rules of magic that will be, again, laid out for us later. Yes. As Raven says, being able to produce food with magic just adds to how weird it is to me that the Weasleys are poor. Well, again, I think that there might be a loophole there that actual sustenance, there are real potatoes sitting in the sink. Presumably real potatoes sitting in the sink. Now we'll use magic to skin them, and we'll use magic to prepare them, and we'll maybe even use magic to cook them, but they are at least real. The sauce, because it is specifically a sauce, because it is specifically an accompaniment, you know, if you summon forth magical sriracha or whatever, you know, you can summon forth a magical condiment that will change your experience of eating the food, but will not provide meaningful nutrition. That, I think, is maybe the loophole that we can use to resolve this outstanding issue. But yeah, I don't know. Good. Yes, Tom says beautifully, it also goes to show that no matter how much experience you may have with magic or parenting, you never have all the answers, and our kids can be our biggest sense of pride and frustration. Absolutely right, Tom. Yes, this is so normal. And I think too that the very normality of this scene is another element here. It's another perspective on this reframing of the Muggle wizard dynamic, the Muggle wizard conflict here, because here we have a very mundane scene augmented by magic, yes, but a very mundane scene nonetheless that takes even normal family interaction and normal family dynamic and renders it in terms of the wizarding world rather than in terms of the Muggle world. This is another way in which we see that kind of ubiquity of wizarding experience versus the preserved kind of sequestered nature of Muggle life. Good. Oh, Heroes and Bards also offers another opportunity, another possible resolution to this problem. Maybe Molly made the sauce earlier and is just now summoning it. She's summoning it from the sauce vat, right? Of course. No, I like that very much, actually. I think that, yes, this could just be a little bit of translocation magic that is happening right here. Another way of doing it. Yes, Raquel says, one thing I love that J.K. Rowling does is she perfectly balances the paradox between fantastical magic and the simplicity of wanting to be loved and have a family. Yes, the emotional heart of Harry Potter is the reason that this series is so beloved. It is the reason that this series works. It is structurally, from the perspective of narrative craft, the reason that these stories work. We are telling a story about real human emotions with which the reader can identify, within which the reader can find empathy and solace and comfort and inspiration too. We are telling a real, grounded, simple, universal, archetypal, elemental story about wanting family and wanting to be loved and accepted and seen and realized and all of these wonderful and primary and powerful things. And we're doing it within the frame of a confection, effectively, right? Less so now than it was perhaps initially, and more so now than it will be ultimately, but still within an airy, fantastical world that allows us to experience wonder and allows us to, most crucially, narratively speaking, expand and expound upon the myths and the metaphors that allow us to understand Harry's emotional journey and the emotional journeys of all of the other attendant characters. But the world itself is not our primary focus here. That's why, for all that I get frustrated about the rules of magic, as a nerd, you know, as someone who loves consistent rules of magic and is interested in that kind of thing from a, you know, D&D playing, video game playing, Tolkien reading perspective. The Tolkien reading is actually a very bad example, specifically when we're talking about the rules of magic, but the rules of history and the rules of geography and the rules of society and the way that the infrastructures of the wizarding world fit together. Yeah, I can be frustrated by some of the inconsistency there, but the inconsistency there has never spoiled my enjoyment of Harry Potter because it is irrelevant to the enjoyment of Harry Potter. Harry Potter is resonant with a profound emotional truth, and that emotional truth is perhaps never more beautifully realized than in the context of Harry's relationship with the Weasleys. I love this stuff, obviously, as you can tell by my enthusiasm as we're moving forward. Yes. Good. Raven says, creamy sauce with no nutritional value actually sounds like an excellent diet product. Put it on everything. Healthy eating with all the taste of delicious dairy. It's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. And It Don't Connect is offering, I need magical Chick-fil-A sauce. Yeah. And Ryan replies to It Don't Connect with the insert shut up and take my money meme. Yes. If only we could add animated GIFs to the Crowdcast chat. This whole thing would be impossible. That's actually a terrible idea. Hey, Crowdcast, if you're listening, please never do that. I'm not sure that I could keep up with that. Good. All right. So that will take us through to the very end of this chapter and to our discussion of Sirius. Ron looked carefully up the table to check that the rest of the family were all busy talking. Then he said very quietly to Harry, "So, have you heard from Sirius lately?" Hermione looked around, listening closely. "Yeah," said Harry softly, "twice. He sounds okay. I wrote to him yesterday. He might write back while I'm here." He suddenly remembered the reason he had written to Sirius, and for a moment was on the verge of telling Ron and Hermione about his scar hurting again, and about the dream that had awoken him. But he really didn't want to worry them just now, not when he himself was feeling so happy and peaceful. "Look at the time," Mrs. Weasley said, suddenly checking her wristwatch. "You really should be in bed, the lot of you. You'll be up at the crack of dawn to get to the cup. Harry, if you leave your school list out, I'll get your things for you tomorrow in Diagon Alley. I'm getting everyone else's. There may not be time after the World Cup. The match went on for 5 days last time." "Wow, hope it does this time," said Harry enthusiastically. "Well, I certainly don't," said Percy sanctimoniously. "I shudder to think what the state of my in-tray would be like if I was away from work for 5 days. Yeah, someone might slip dragon dung in it. Yeah, someone might slip dragon dung in it again, eh, Percy?" said Fred. "That was a sample of fertilizer from Norway," said Percy, going very red in the face. "It was nothing personal." "It was," Fred whispered to Harry as he got up from the table. "We sent it." The relentless bullying of Percy Weasley continues apace, you guys. We must stand together against the injustice wrought here by Fred and George Weasley. I know. Taking it all just a little seriously. But it is interesting that, we talked about this back in the context of Prisoner of Azkaban, and I've talked about it really since the very beginning of the series, but the persecution of Percy Weasley by Fred and George, the constant mockery and borderline bullying of Percy by Fred and George became uncomfortable in the pages of Prisoner of Azkaban. We were talking about Fred and George and how they are, from some perspectives, if you are stepping outside of the boarding school story into the fantasy story, if you're stepping away from the complex and somewhat paradoxical morality associated with boarding school adventure stories, and you're looking at these characters as adults possessed of a certain independent agency and a certain, moral obligation themselves, Fred and George become very problematic characters very quickly. They are the worst. And their persecution of Percy is bitter. And while it is used for comic effect and comic relief, is a little too harsh and a little too relentless to be genuinely amusing or to be easily dismissed. And it's very interesting that we had that discussion back in the pages of Prisoner of Azkaban, and now here we are again. And we've broadened still further the problem of Fred and George's behavior. We're having Molly Weasley now explicitly acknowledge that they are going to get themselves in trouble. This isn't trouble within the frame of Hogwarts. This isn't a juvenile form of trouble, an adolescent form of trouble, a safe form of trouble. Rebellion within a school structure is admirable from a certain perspective because you are still safe, because you are still within the confines of that structure, and that structure exists primarily to protect you and to protect the other children. So rebellion within that structure is actually somewhat laudable, somewhat admirable, somewhat inevitable, I dare say. But that kind of rebellion against adult society is very different. That kind of rebellion speaks to a kind of arrested development from Fred and George. Again, I know that I'm putting so many pins in so many things as we're moving through these chapters, but really these chapters, this reading, this week's session is priming the pump for discussions which will be much more immediate and much more illuminated later in the book and, gosh, later in the series. There are things that happen in these chapters which we, like the sauce emerging from Molly's wand, that we will circle back around to, right at the end of our time here in Dear Mr. Potter. That push back does give a new slant, a new perspective on Harry's adolescent experience, you know, on his transformation from the child to the man. There's a lot of richness here, and yeah, it's very complicated as we look at Fred and George. Good. All right. So this gets us to the end of chapter 5, Weasley's Wizard Wheezes. A couple of interesting incidental details here. A little bit of world building. Molly's going to take care of the shopping at Diagon Alley. That's going to be formidable, trying to handle all of that by herself, you know, laden with books and wands and owls and who knows all what. That's going to be significant, but also very sweet, of course, also very sweet. And then we move into chapter 6 with the portkey. Oh, actually, before we get to that, we should, of course, talk about Sirius Black, and we should talk about Harry's decision here. He suddenly remembered the reason he had written to Sirius, and for a moment he was on the verge of telling Ron and Hermione about his scar hurting again and about the dream that had awoken him, but he really didn't want to worry them just now, not when he was feeling so happy and peaceful. And again, we get one of these very precise explorations of Harry's emotional state and Harry's emotional response. He suddenly remembered the reason and for a moment was on the verge of telling Ron and Hermione, right? So he goes, oh, right, I wrote to Sirius just yesterday because, hey, check this out. I had this crazy dream and my scar was hurting and everything seemed dark for a few minutes. It was very, very bad. It was a grim time. So I reached out to Sirius because I wanted some parental reassurance. But he's not going to say that now. Why? He really didn't want to worry them just now, not when he himself was feeling so happy and peaceful. I am happy and peaceful, therefore I do not want to worry my friends. I do not want to burden my friends while I am in this state of, what? Familial comfort, familial repose, this state of belonging and being loved and having my community, my family, my extended family, my found family around me. I don't want to worry you because I am currently in that state. That's an interesting choice for Harry to make. It's not that he doesn't want to worry them because they are clearly happy and settled and enjoying this convivial spirit that accompanies these Weasley family gatherings. He doesn't want to keep this secret because it will upset them. It seems as though he wants to keep the secret because it will upset him. If he tells them about it, he doesn't want to worry them just now, not when he himself was feeling so happy and peaceful. I'm feeling good, and so I don't want to worry my friends, because if I worry my friends, then I too will be caught up in that cycle. I'll be, yes, as Dry Heaving Llama says, or maybe Harry's just too freaking full and he's lethargic. That could also be it, right? This could be like the post-Thanksgiving, Dark Lord something. Can't really get into it right now. I just need to rest and digest for 4 or 5 hours. Yeah, good. Duncan X says, I know that when I'm in a good mood, I don't want to think about the depressing stuff in my life. Yes, exactly right. There's that. It's not just about a good mood, though, I think. It's also about comfort and about light. I think that it is easy for Harry to feel besieged by the specter of he who shall not be named when he is in Privet Drive, when he is uncomfortable, when he is unloved and unwanted and is not in the company of his family. But now, in the company of his family, it is easier still for him to dismiss these fears, these concerns, these lingering memories. Now, he is, in a sense, safe. And I'm not pulling this, of course, from thin air. I'm not just imagining that this is the philosophical thrust of this book, because all of this ties back to our discussion of Patronuses and Dementors in Prisoner of Azkaban. Harry right now is feeling comfort and hope and security and love. And these things, as we know within the frame of the Harry Potter series as a whole, ward off despair, ward off hopelessness. They act as a shield against these things. So he doesn't want to worry his friends. He doesn't want to, and worry arguably would be connected to that notion of challenging or stressing hope as a virtue. He doesn't want to worry his friends because right now he is protected from the immediacy of those thoughts. Not protected in a magical sense from dark forces moving in the world, but protected from having those thoughts impinge upon him, having those memories, those beliefs, those dreams impinge upon him. He is safe and secure within himself. He is protected by that silver shimmer of the Patronus, effectively, right now. And the fell, chill influence of the Dementors can't quite reach him. This does seem to be consistent with our handling of good and evil and comfort and discomfort and hope and hopelessness and optimism and cynicism and connectivity and discontinuity throughout the entirety of the Harry Potter series. It's another example of the simple pleasures and the simple virtues making us more whole, making us more complete, making us more secure, making us ultimately more ourselves. Let me see here. Oh, what do we see? Jin is calling something out in the chat here, and I'm scrolling back to see everyone. Oh, does Alistair have a new microphone cover? Have we already addressed the scandalous amount of blue in the frame? There is a lot of blue going on in the frame today, isn't there? This is not a new microphone cover, but a different microphone cover. I have recently moved everything around here in the studio, and the microphone with the black cover is now on the other side of my desk. So it is useful for recording podcasts with other people, but not so great for recording podcasts where you guys actually have to be able to hear my voice. I am just noticing, let me cancel the slide just for the benefit of the live audience. Yes, a preponderance of blue here. We have the blue studio wall behind me, my blue shirt. As we know, I only ever appear on the internet wearing blue or gray, as has become noted by people who've been attending my live sessions for quite some time. Yeah, a lot of blue in the frame. I am a Ravenclaw. You can also see the little Ravenclaw glass on the shelf behind me, inadvertently in a position of prominence, I must admit. I'm just now realizing that I have tucked the Gryffindor and Slytherin pint glasses away behind the Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw pint glasses, thereby showing my allegiance. It's really all just about Hermione and Cedric Diggory today. It's probably an explanation, right? That's probably an explanation. All right, let's get back to our slides and press onward into Chapter 6, The Portkey. If I can make this work, here we are. So they're still in bed, said Fred grumpily, pulling his bowl of porridge toward him. Why can't we apparate too? Because you're not of age and you haven't passed your test, snapped Mrs. Weasley. And where have those girls got to? She bustled out of the kitchen and they heard her climbing the stairs. You have to pass a test to apparate, Harry asked. Oh, yes, said Mr. Weasley, tucking the ticket safely back in the back pocket of his jeans. The Department of Magical Transportation has to fine a couple of people the other day for apparating without a license. It's not easy, apparition, and when it's not done properly, it can lead to nasty complications. The pair I'm talking about went and splinched themselves. Everyone around the table except Harry winced. Splinched? Said Harry. They left half of themselves behind, said Mr. Weasley, now spooning large amounts of treacle onto his porridge. So, of course, they were stuck, couldn't move either way, had to wait for the accidental magic reversal squad to sort them out. Meant a fair old bit of paperwork, I can tell you. What with the muggles who spotted the body parts they'd left behind. Harry had a sudden vision of a pair of legs and an eyeball lying abandoned on the pavement of Privet Drive. Were they okay? He asked, startled. Oh, yes, said Mr. Weasley matter-of-factly, but they got a heavy fine, and I don't think they'll be trying it again in a hurry. You don't mess around with apparition. There are plenty of adult wizards who don't bother with it. Prefer brooms, slower, but safer. Again, the decency, the bureaucratic middle management job for life with the ministry decency of Arthur Weasley shining through here. The terrible occurrence of two wizards getting splinched after trying to apparate without a license is just a casual incidental detail. Oh, yes, but they got a heavy fine, and I don't think they'll be trying it again in a hurry. The fine there is fascinating. This is not a magical solution to a magical problem. This is a bureaucratic solution to a magical problem, right? This ties in again with this ongoing discussion, which I'm sure you can all anticipate now. This ongoing discussion about the bureaucracy present in the wizarding world. I'm noticing here that Jen is saying in the Crowdcast chat, splinched is such a perfectly disgusting word. Yes, a absolutely disgusting word. It's very, very unpleasant. Yeah. Or are we talking about treacle? Yeah, treacle, molasses, I suppose, would be the closest American equivalent. Incredibly viscous, sticky, incredibly sweet, awful, awful, awful stuff. Yes. Yes, good. Grace, so they cannot side along, says Grace. Well, here's the thing, Grace. Side-along apparition has not yet, side-along apparating, I should say, has not yet been invented by J.K. Rowling. There is no dramatic necessity nor narrative necessity for side-along apparating in the story as yet. So no, when it is introduced later, it will of course be retconned that, oh no, it exists. It's just very difficult, so we don't do it often. Like it's not something that we do casually, but there will be at that point a narrative necessity for it. There is not a narrative necessity for it right now. Indeed, the narrative necessity in the frame of this chapter has nothing to do with apparating. It has everything to do with the introduction of the portkey. This is why we are putting all of this emphasis onto apparating as a magical discipline, as the magical equivalent of getting one's driver's license, for example. It also doesn't quite address See, this again, right? So the fine is a bureaucratic solution to a wizarding problem, to a magical problem, but the license itself is a bureaucratic problem, a bureaucratic solution to a magical problem, because the license does not guarantee that you are able to apparate carefully. Apparating is still tremendously dangerous. You may still end up getting splinched when you try to apparate. Now, the license means that you have passed a certain test, that you have overcome the hurdles, that you are at least equipped with the necessary information that will allow you to apparate safely. But just as in the real world, possession of the license does not mean that you will always do this thing safely. People crash cars all the time. People drive carelessly all the time, and they do it despite being in possession of a driver's license. The driver's license is a bureaucratic solution to a civil problem. The apparition license, the apparating license, is a bureaucratic solution to a magical problem, but it's fundamentally addressing the same issue. The idea that licensing something therefore makes it completely safe is, of course, outlandish, as we'll see again later in the series. Yes, good. Yeah, Raven says we need to establish the portkey so there's no side-along apparition. That's exactly it. That's exactly it. And the establishment of the portkey is rather beautifully done. I like it quite a lot. Yes. Chekhov's portkey and Schrodinger's side-along, says Tom. Oh, I like that very much. If I had a Harry Potter Muggle Rock kind of band, that is what I would call them. Chekhov's portkey and Schrodinger's side-along. Very, very good, Tom. Thank you for contributing that in the chat. Excellent. Good. Okay. So this is our introduction to apparating, our kind of formal introduction to apparating and to the existence of the apparating license. More on that later. Let's talk a little about the arrangements for the World Cup. It was chilly and the moon was still out. Only a dull greenish tinge along the horizon to their right showed that daybreak was drawing closer. Harry, having been thinking about the thousands of wizards speeding toward the Quidditch World Cup, sped up to walk with Mr. Weasley. So how does everyone get there without all the Muggles noticing? He asked. Oh, it's been a massive organizational problem, sighed Mr. Weasley. Trouble is, about 100,000 wizards turn up to the World Cup, and of course, we just haven't got a magical site big enough to accommodate them all. There are places Muggles can't penetrate, but imagine trying to pack 100,000 wizards into Diagon Alley or Platform 9 3/4. So we had to find a nice deserted moor and set up as many anti-Muggle precautions as possible. The whole ministry's been working on it for months. First, of course, we had to stagger the arrivals. People with cheaper tickets had to arrive 2 weeks beforehand. A limited number use Muggle transport, but we can't have too many clogging up their buses and trains. Remember, wizards are coming from all over the world. Some apparate, of course, but we have to set up safe points for them to appear well away from Muggles. I believe there's a handy wood they're using as the apparition point. For those who don't want to apparate or can't, we use portkeys. They're objects that are used to transport wizards from one spot to another at a prearranged time. You can do large groups at a time if you need to. There have been 200 portkeys placed at strategic points around Britain, and the nearest one is up at the top of Stoats Head Hill, so that's where we're headed. Mr. Weasley pointed ahead of them, where a large black mass rose beyond the village of Ottery and Catchpole. What sort of objects are portkeys? Said Harry curiously. Well, they can be anything, said Mr. Weasley. Unobtrusive things, obviously, so Muggles don't go around picking them up and playing with them. Stuff they'll just think is litter, excuse me. We're talking about J.K. Rowling's power of math here. 100,000 always seemed like a ridiculously high number, says Alice. The logistics, it would take years, not months. Yes, the actual math underpinning these logistics is probably not going to withstand much scrutiny. But the idea, I mean, the core concept here is a very powerful one, is a very compelling one. 100,000 wizards traveling to Britain from all over the world for the Quidditch World Cup that is going to take place upon an abandoned moor. And of course, we'll be able to talk about this more specifically next week when we actually get to the Quidditch World Cup. This is a huge undertaking. And all of these logistical precautions, why are they in place? Not for the convenience of wizards, not for the safety of wizards, but rather for the preservation of the ignorance of Muggles. We are preserving the masquerade. We are preserving the facade here of Muggle life and Muggle existence. We can travel using Muggle transport, but not too many and not all at once. So instead of having 100,000 wizards all suddenly apparate onto this moor or into a stadium that is custom built in some other part of the country for this express purpose, we have to go through this incredible and labyrinthine process. People with cheap tickets have to show up to the Quidditch World Cup 2 weeks in advance, turning the Quidditch World Cup into something less like a sporting event and more like more like Burning Man, more like Woodstock. I mean, there were just wizards camped out here for weeks at a time, potentially. If they arrived 2 weeks ago, and it is not inconceivable that the World Cup itself might last for a week, wizards are taking 3 weeks out of their life to go and watch this sporting event. 100,000 wizards are theoretically taking that amount of time off work, out of their lives, to go and camp out in a field, all to preserve the illusion of Muggle mundanity. It is obviously fragile. I think that one of the things that J.K. Rowling is trying to do here, in addition to setting up the portkey, which will be so very significant later, in addition to kind of giving us a better sense of the geographical existence of the wizarding world, the fact that wizards are traveling and have to travel, and there is this logistical operation, and apart, of course, from playing into that new and ever more impressive, ever more arcane, ever more labyrinthine, bureaucratic sense of the wizarding world. Apart from all of that, I genuinely believe that J.K. Rowling is trying to indicate the temporary nature of this arrangement, the vulnerability, the susceptibility, the easily fractured nature of Muggle ignorance at this point. It's pretty tough to believe that all of these wizards are orchestrating this incredible logistical effort and feeling good about it, right? This is a system that has endured, yes, but is obviously nearing breaking point. Yeah. Let me see here. Okay, good. I think we're all caught up. Yeah, the Ministry of Magic, says Jen, desperately needs a few good admins. This place is a mess, right? But then again, what is the first purpose of a bureaucracy? The first purpose of a bureaucracy is not efficient and effective action. The first purpose of a bureaucracy is the preservation of itself. Bureaucracies expand, and this is, I mean, a cynical perspective on government, I suppose, a cynical perspective on human society, I suppose, but it is a cynical perspective on human society and on government specifically that is a fundamental part of the understanding of British political life, right? British political life is being satirized here, but not parodied here. We are poking fun at the various committees and offices and extra-governmental bodies and departments within the real British government, but we're not exaggerating them to the point of parody. We're not breaking the realism of that frame. This is... I guess we are to a certain degree. What is it that we're satirizing? We are satirizing the popular perspective on British political institutions. Yeah, that seems to be where we are. Okay, let's... Good. Okay, let's move on to... We've got 2 more slides to go and only 9 minutes to get through them. Let's see what we can do. Well, we must, of course, meet again Cedric Diggory and his father, because we just don't have enough characters in this book yet. So in addition to the 9 Weasleys, in addition to Hermione and Harry and the Dursleys, we're now going to get the Diggorys too. "Amos!" said Mr. Weasley, smiling as he strode over to the man who had shouted. The rest of them followed. Mr. Weasley was shaking hands with a ruddy-faced wizard with a scrubby brown beard who was holding a moldy-looking old boot in the other hand. "This is Amos Diggory, everyone," said Mr. Weasley. "He works for the Department of the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, and I think you know his son, Cedric." Cedric Diggory was an extremely handsome boy of around 17. He was captain and seeker of the Hufflepuff House Quidditch team at Hogwarts. "Hi," said Cedric, looking around at them all. Everyone said hi back, except Fred and George, who merely nodded. They had never quite forgiven Cedric for beating their team, Gryffindor, in the first Quidditch match of the previous year. "Long walk, Arthur?" Cedric's father asked. "Not too bad," said Mr. Weasley. "We live just on the other side of the village there. You?" "Had to get up at 2, didn't we?" said. "I tell you, I'll be glad when he's got his apparition test. Still not complaining. Quidditch World Cup. Wouldn't miss it for a sack full of galleons. And the tickets cost about that. Mind you, looks like I got off easy." Amos Diggory peered good-naturedly around at the 3 Weasley boys, Harry, Hermione, and Ginny. "All these yours, Arthur?" "Oh, no, only the redheads," said Mr. Weasley, pointing out his children. "This is Hermione, friend of Ron's, and Harry, another friend." "Merlin's beard," said Amos Diggory, his eyes widening. "Harry? Harry Potter?" Yeah," said Harry. Let's look at the decency of Cedric Diggory. I didn't pull the rest of the conversation where Cedric disavows his father's perspective on what it is that makes an effective flyer, an effective Quidditch player, on what exactly happened between the Hufflepuff and Gryffindor teams in the previous year. Cedric he's a good guy. He's a good guy. He is a capital GG good guy, I dare say. And he is humble, and he's pushing back again, is given the opportunity to push back against his father's somewhat more overbearing, albeit avuncular, but somewhat more overbearing attitude. But the other thing that happens here, of course, is Harry's celebrity. Harry has just come from a place in which his celebrity is absolutely derided and dismissed. When he is with the Dursleys, he is not Harry Potter, the boy who lived. He is an inconvenient waste of space and food and time and attention. He is an inconvenience when he is with the Dursleys, as well, increasingly, as an outright threat. Then he goes to the Weasleys, where he isn't Harry Potter, the boy who lived either. He's just their friend Harry. He's Junior Weasley. He's at home with these people. He's comfortable with these people. But now we're moving back into the realm of the broader wizarding world, and Harry's notoriety expanded out even beyond Hogwarts now, right? Harry has been at Hogwarts for 3 full years. He's entering his 4th year at this point, and while he is famous, and while that fame is going to be of absolute significance later in this book, while he is famous, his reality, his truth, his identity is starting to supersede his initial fame, right? He's less Harry Potter, the boy who lived, and Harry Potter, who went through everything last year and the year before and the year before. He has a lot of adventures, Harry Potter, breaks a lot of school rules, but does a lot of good. That's what I like about Harry Potter. He is more himself than he is his celebrity. But we're not at Hogwarts now. We're out in the broader world, and Amos Diggory's response to Harry is by no means unusual, by no means special. Merlin's beard, Harry Potter. He's heard tell of Harry and is still moved by it. Yeah, Cedric is so good, says Angela Lurie, so good and decent and embarrassed by his dad's bragging. Yeah, Lily's quoting. I said to him, I said, yes. Gorgeous dialogue there, quoting from Lily Evans there, yes. Oh, Jenna is asking, oh boy. Jenna asks, is Cedric the Harry Potter equivalent of Captain America? Yes, I think so. Cedric Diggory could do this all day. There's probably a meme in that, right? Yes, I think so. He displays a true and a fundamental decency. I don't want to run too far ahead with our conversations about Cedric, because of course we're going to have plenty of opportunity to talk about him by the time we get to the Triwizard Tournament. He's going to be a constant accompaniment and is often going to be used as a point of contrast with Harry, as Harry is struggling and scrapping, not just in the actual challenges that he must overcome within the context of the Triwizard Tournament, but as he is dealing with his life throughout this school year, he is going to be struggling while Cedric is making it look effortless. And that is not a product of Cedric's absolute capability, and certainly not a product of any exceptionalism, which we might attribute to Cedric Diggory, but rather a product of his decency, of his goodness. Yes, if Cedric Diggory has a superpower, it is heart. He's just a good kid. And yeah, I'm a big fan. Oh my gosh, we're really delving into the MCU crossovers. Let me see here. Lupin is Bruce Banner, says Clambert. I like that quite a lot. Yeah, that works out pretty well. Good. Excellent. All right. So that gets us up to Amos Diggory and Cedric. And let's conclude with the use of the actual portkey here. With difficulty owing to their bulky backpacks, the 9 of them crowded around the old boot held out by Amos Diggory. They all stood there in a tight circle as a chill breeze swept over the hilltop. Nobody spoke. It suddenly occurred to Harry how odd this would look if a muggle were to walk up here now. 9 people, 2 of them grown men, clutching this manky old boot in the semi-darkness, waiting. 3, muttered Mr. Weasley, one eye still on his watch. 2, 1. It happened immediately. Harry felt as though a hook just behind his navel had been suddenly jerked irresistibly forward. His feet left the ground. He could feel Ron and Hermione on either side of him, their shoulders banging into his. They were all speeding forward in a howl of wind and swirling color. His forefinger was stuck to the boot as though it were pulling him magnetically onward, and then his feet slammed into the ground. Ron staggered into him and he fell over. The portkey hit the ground near his head with a heavy thud. Harry looked up. Mr. Weasley, Mr. Diggory, and Cedric were still standing, though looking very windswept. Everyone else was on the ground. 5:07 from Stoat's Head Hill, said a voice. One of the incidental details that I love here, Mr. Weasley, Mr. Diggory, and Cedric were still standing, though looking very windswept. And I imagine Amos Diggory looking a little disheveled, and Arthur Weasley constantly looks disheveled, I am sure. But you get the feeling even there that Cedric is just kind of squaring his shoulders and giving a little cocky tilt of his head as the wind takes his magnificent head of hair. Cedric Diggory presented to us consistently in very minor and reflexive and absolutely open to interpretation ways as just a solid guy, a decent guy, a hero in the chivalric tradition. I think we're going to talk about this much later when we get to the Triwizard Tournament, but though Harry and Cedric are both heroes, they are heroes of a very different sort. They are heroes of very different traditions, I think. And that is true in a more expansive and inclusive sense, I think, of the kind of heroism espoused by Gryffindor and the kind of heroism espoused by Hufflepuff. I think that Hufflepuff is home to the chivalric heroes, Ravenclaw home to the Byronic heroes, Slytherin home to the modern heroes, Gryffindor home to the classical heroes. If you've heard me talk about those 4 types of heroes, which you won't be able to find much on the internet about because that's kind of my pet theory about different heroic archetypes, don't worry, I will have opportunity to talk about that by the time we get to it, because luckily the other competitors in the Triwizard Tournament also kind of embody some of those heroic archetypes. Gosh, there's so much to talk about in this book. As much as this book is fairly superficial in a beat by beat, scene by scene, plot by plot point movement, the thematic resonance within this book is absolutely astonishing, enchanting, and just completely to my taste. So I'm very much looking forward to discussing all of that. Good. Okay. Is there anything happening here in the chat that I need to catch up with before we move on to some questions? No, I think we're good. Okay. I think we're good. Let's open up some questions here. It is, we're at time, in fact. Oh, in fact, before we get to all of that, let's take a look at next week's reading. The next session is, for all that this session has been preparatory, for all that this session has been, laying a foundation for what follows thereafter. Next week, things get fierce, and they get fierce pretty quick. Next week, chapters 7 to 9 of Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, Bagman and Crouch, the Quidditch World Cup, and the Dark Mark. An evening session next week, 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central on January the 16th, Tuesday, January the 16th. I hope you will all be able to join me there for that. You can, of course, find all of the schedule updates by heading on over to pointnorthmedia.com and clicking the podcasts button at the top of the page. There you will find the embedded calendar where you can see the up-to-the-minute live updates for my broadcast schedule. You can also subscribe to the newsletter that will appear in your inbox every Monday with the full schedule for the week ahead. You can also head on over to pointnorthmedia.com and click the blog post buttons at the bottom of the main page there. This week on Point North will give you all the information about the schedule for that particular week. And an important announcement that I can't believe I kept to the end. I probably should have made this announcement at the beginning, but hey, I'm sure everyone who listens to this podcast has stuck with me all the way to the end. We have, you guys, a new place to discuss Harry Potter, a new place to discuss all of the stories that we address here at Point North Media, and that is the brand new, shiny, and still somewhat in disarray Point North Forum. You can head on over to pointnorthmedia.com/forum and sign up right now. It's a little bare bones. I'm still kicking the tires. I'm still making sure that everything is working out, but obviously I need a few of you to come on over and start having conversations about Harry Potter in order to make sure that the tires have been properly kicked and all of the bare sparking wires have been tucked safely away. So head on over to pointnorthmedia.com/forum. You can discuss Harry Potter there, of course, there and back again there. You can just hang out with the fine folks of the Point North community. You are all, gosh, just the smartest and most insightful and kindest and sweetest and most positive people that I have ever had the honor of knowing. So I urge you all to head on over there so we can hang out like the Weasleys, right? We can all eat outside at the Point North Forum. That, I think, is going to be how we will pass our time there. Let's... Jen is threatening here in the chat. Alistair, I'm turning your forum into a /fic haven. It's fine. I'm good with that. That's absolutely fine. You do you, Jen. You do you, as if I could stop you even if I wanted to. All right, let's... take a look at some questions here just for a few minutes before we wrap up. Dry Heaving Llamas asks, when magic and physics collide, does magic always win, or are there situations in the Harry Potter series where physics prevails? Interesting. I hadn't really thought of this question before, but I do think that there are... Magic within the frame of Harry Potter is imperfect. For all that wizards have been around for thousands of years, right? We have this history of Hogwarts that stretches back 1,000 years and older magical traditions still. And we get the idea that magic is constantly being refined. New spells are being invented and new techniques are being arrived at by the wizarding community. For all that is true, magic is a ramshackle affair. Magic is more often than not a blunt instrument in the world of Harry Potter. There are always consequences, right? I'm thinking in particular, let's look at the portkey that is used right here at the end of today's reading. The portkey physically gives Harry the sensation of being tugged, which might just be, psychosomatic, might just be a magical manifestation within his body. But then when he emerges on the other side, when he actually arrives at the Quidditch World Cup, he falls, or I guess he stands and Ron crashes into him and they fall. And that doesn't seem to be terribly unusual. Why is the magic so poorly refined? Is it that the magic is ramshackle? Is it that the magic is just a blunt instrument? Is it just that the magic, we need a portkey that'll transport you to a place? There, good enough, done. Or is it that magic as a violation of the natural order of things, magic as a violation of physics, is facing some kind of opposition, friction points with the natural world, friction points with physics, or direct opposition, a counter pressure from physics? Yeah, fine. Okay, you can travel from this place to this place, but we're going to talk a little, you and me, physics is saying, you and me, magic, we're going to have a conversation about conservation of momentum. We're going to have a conversation about moving great distances at great rapidity. Like, okay. And I'm thinking too of flying on broomsticks and feeling the wind whistling about you, and the kind of the physicality of the ways in which wizards interact with the world is generally heightened. And I think it's heightened primarily, of course, this is a story. It is heightened for narrative effect. It is more dramatic if Harry is flying on a broomstick and he can feel the wind tugging at his robes and threatening to tear the glasses off of his face. That's more dramatic than Harry sitting serenely in a bubble as he flies at several hundred miles an hour on his broomstick. But there's no reason why magic shouldn't be able to do that. There's no reason why a properly refined and sophisticated approach to the magical arts couldn't protect the rider of a broomstick, or couldn't protect someone using a portkey, who couldn't just make you emerge, here is the portkey that transports you to the Quidditch World Cup. Not only will you not stumble and fall on the ground when you get to the far side, but it'll also provide you a comfortable chair and a cup of tea. That's what magic can do. There's no reason to believe that's not the case. Magic feels inelegant oftentimes within the pages of Harry Potter, which I like a great deal, actually. I like it being this kind of slightly discordant presence within the metaphysical frame, I suppose, of J.K. Rowling's secondary creation. And this extends as far as even elements that we've discussed today, like Molly getting distracted. Molly's getting fired up when she's in her kitchen, right? She's furious with Fred and George, and she waves her wand more emphatically than she meant to, and the potatoes pop out of their skins. That's a perfect example, I think, of the ways in which our emotional responses can interfere with the flow of magic too. Magic, not a precise science. Let me see as we move on. Ty asks, would it be a stretch to view the Dursleys' view of wizards and witches and the wizarding world as being a casual metaphor for racism? I do not think that you would have to squint very hard in order to make that work, Ty. I do not think that you would have to deliberately ignore or be selective in your reading of the text in order to make that interpretation work. It is certainly possible. I hesitate only because we're going to get more compelling metaphors for racism in the frame of this specific book, in fact. I suppose, racism as we see it in the pages of Harry Potter is more often applied to Muggle-born wizards, the racially charged epithet that we have heard so far in the pages of Harry Potter. I mean, we've got squibs. Squibs are different though, because they're that particular insult, that particular epithet is anchored in a kind of capability, a paucity of capability, certainly, but still a kind of capability. We don't dismiss entire communities of squibs, but we are all too eager to dismiss entire communities of Muggle-born wizards, that is to say, of mudbloods, a word which I do not like using, but still must be used for the sake of clarity, if nothing else. That's the most powerful and compelling metaphor for racism that we've seen in the Harry Potter books thus far. I don't think that you have to contort yourself terribly to make the Dursleys work in that too. Though I would argue that the more compelling metaphor for the Dursleys is that kind of snobby observation of social class and social differential that is all too common in Britain, is all too common in middle-class communities in Britain, that is all too common in suburbia in Britain. That seems to me to be the more compelling metaphor there. But certainly, yes, I think you can make racism work too. Not a terribly sophisticated, but if, as you say, you're referring specifically to a casual metaphor for racism, yeah, I think you can make that work. I think you can absolutely make that work. Just making sure I'm catching up here with the xenophobia, maybe more than racism, says Elizabeth. Yes. Yes. In principle, yes. In practice, no. I think in practice, Vernon Dursley is all too eager to band wizards together. We don't want any of that sort of stuff, right? Do they even know how to dress? I presume they'll be driving. What even kind of car would they be driving? You know, we get this kind of very this systematic response to wizards and wizardry from the Dursleys that I think is less about the kind of generalized anxiety and fear that we would associate with xenophobia, and more the specific and kind of institutionalized response, that is kind of formalized and systemized response that we would get from that kind of racist response, if we're reading the metaphor that way. Though again, both elements of that absolutely consistent with the reading of British social class too. So that I think would also work. Let me see as I catch up with the chat. Good. Okay. Every time Alistair says he's getting caught up on the chat, I start feeling guilty, says Jen. You know what, Jen? You do you right here in the chat. I'm somewhat distracted, of course, always and constantly by your presence here in the chat and by the conversations, which are getting wildly out of control here in the chat. But if you guys haven't, if you're listening to the podcast version of this recording, or if you're watching this after the fact and you haven't yet had the opportunity to join me for a live session and take part in the riotous Crowdcast chat, which accompanies Dear Mr. Potter in particular, I urge you to do so. It is an experience. Okay, let's do maybe one more question. Two more questions. Okay, let's take a very quick question here from Tom. This is a great question. Back to last week, why does Voldemort call Pettigrew Wormtail? Wasn't that his nickname with his Hogwarts chums? Does Voldy using that maybe infer his dominance over Wormtail and his complete bending of him to Voldy's will? Tom asked and answered, sir. Yes, that was my reading of it. Absolutely. I think that he is using Wormtail not with affection, though, of course, there was an open question mark over the degree to which Wormtail was ever used with affection, but it certainly indicated the nickname Wormtail is, if nothing else, even if it is constantly and consistently used throughout Peter Pettigrew's school years as a mark of snide derision, it is still a token of identity. It is still a token of belonging. Yes, it might not be a great nickname, but it's still his nickname. It's still his nickname that the other Marauders gave him, and that is significant. So even if we interpret it as negatively as possible within the frame of Peter Pettigrew's Hogwarts experience, it still indicates belonging, and I'm absolutely confident that Voldemort is subverting that to indicate how he no longer, how Pettigrew, how Wormtail no longer has a community, how he has been driven from his community, how he has betrayed his community. I absolutely buy that as a means of dominance and domination. Yes, that reads very convincingly and compellingly to me, Tom. Let's take our last question here from Rayla Lynn. Been thinking about Cedric lately. Hey, who hasn't, Rayla Lynn? How do you think the last 3 years have affected him? I picture Cedric telling other students not to gawk at Harry on the train. He's a first year, not a zoo animal. Rayla Lynn, you're breaking my heart. Is that what this question is? Is just you making the case for Cedric Diggory being the best human being? Because I'm with you on that. And I'm not sure that I can offer any dissenting opinion. Rayla continues, he saw Harry be sorted. He was likely there when Harry was deboned. He probably told the Hufflepuffs to stop their silly nonsense. Cedric probably received concerned letters from his dad. He slept in the Great Hall. I wonder how the Dementors affected Cedric. Anyway, gotta get back to work. Peace. You did bail on that question. You were just making, you're writing fan fiction here, Rayla Lynn, which I absolutely applaud. Yes, I am most interested. And we're actually, believe it or not, going to get an opportunity to talk about this because of the close connection with the Dementors and issues of hope and hopelessness and the way that the Triwizard Tournament plays out. We're actually going to get an opportunity to speculate directly how Cedric would have engaged with the Dementors back during the events of Prisoner of Azkaban. I am with you, Rayla Lynn, absolutely on your description of Cedric's actions over the course of the last 3 years. The best of us all, best Hufflepuff. There he is. All right, guys, that is going to do it. I think that's going to wrap it up for this discussion. I will be back, as I said, next Tuesday, an evening session for the next 3 chapters, chapters 7 to 9, Bagman and Crouch, the Quidditch World Cup, and the Dark Mark, 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central, next Tuesday, that is January the 16th. I hope you will be able to join me for that. I also have my upcoming There and Back Again episode. This week's There and Back Again taking place at 3 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Central on Thursday afternoon, looking at Chapter 2 of Book 4 of The Lord of the Rings as we march ever onward into the dead marshes in the company of Gollum. I've entitled that session Gollum the Great because of Gollum's Monologue? Is monologue the right word? I'll have to figure that out before I get there on Thursday. Monologue is challenging when you're talking about Gollum. That will do it, though, for this session of Dear Mr. Potter. Thank you all so much for joining me. I hope to see you all over on the Point North Forum, pointnorthmedia.com/forum. I will talk to you all again soon. Until then, mischief managed. Take care.